first let's talk about the whole term pilot. You guys have been involved in pilots. Both LearnLaunch and LEAP have been enormously important in articulating what we think a pilot should be. Eileen at ThinkCERCA and Chris at Lexia have been involved in bringing their products to these pilots. So what, in one sentence, tell me, Megan and then Chris, and then I really want to hear from Eileen and Chris, see if you agree, what do you think a pilot is all about?
Piloting in a sentence, for me, from my context, is, I would say, is helping teams of teachers try a new resource that is aligned to a particular problem of practice or goal that they have. And so that process is a pilot, and there's more to that process, but just sort of in one quick sentence, I think that's how I'd sum it up. What do you think, Chris?
Love it. And to build on that, I think the word that came immediately to mind was reality. So it's not a mental exercise like a pilot is. We're going to put our feet to the fire. We're actually going to do this in the real world, which is the hardest part of all of this. To then inform decisions, to align to a goal. We're really huge on having a goal for any type of pilot. So you're not just doing things for the fun of it, but you're informing a decision, whether it's scaling, whether that's removal of a tool, whether it's the learning curve, whether it's IT kind of stuff. But the pilot is, for me, is very much reality of like, we're going to do this and learn along the way.
So it's great. And so reality is what we're really talking about, because you said process, and that really matters. A process suggests that it's something that's going to happen in many places, many times, but the process is honored. And then reality is really critical, because we're going to get into, well, what is the reality of different companies as well as from the learner's perspective. So Eileen and Chris, you guys have participated in pilots run by these guys. How do you define pilots, and maybe think about it in terms of like, okay, you could just go into a school, hand over your tool. That's not what we're exactly talking about. Eileen?
I think in the context of a pilot of the nature that we're talking about here, the word pilot means something very different to me.
So what?
I think it means studied, actually measured and supported. When other people use the term pilot, it's sort of like, there's far less commitment to the success in the pressure testing of whatever it is, whether it's a methodology, a product, and any initiative or process. I think I would like to add the word studied to the beginning of the name pilot for it to actually serve the purpose that we, I think, all agree is the purpose, which is see if this thing works, and if it works, let's scale it. I don't think that everyone means that when they say pilot. I think these organizations do, and that is the benefit for a company and a district.
Excellent. Chris, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I strongly agree. I'd even go further, Eileen, and say that when you hear the word pilot used in casual conversation at a conference like this, it means so many different things, the word is almost meaningless, because everyone is different, and often we're using the same word, but we really are meaning something different. So the two words that come to my mind when we think about the nature of these particular pilots is collaboration. Collaboration among, in this case, Lexia, certainly Leap Innovations, and the educators. And then also, I think, is data. Because what really characterizes the nature of these pilots is that they're truly data-driven. We use that term all the time in education, but here really applying it to the pilot process. For firms like ours, research really, really matters. And to have the benefit of a credible third-party organization that really is a thought leader really brings a level of not just credibility, but rigor.
Okay, so we're creating a word picture here of pilot. I loved Eileen's idea of let's start with the word studied. So studied pilot, as opposed to kind of random trial. A studied pilot that has a process, that has a reality, and then, as Chris pointed out, has a sense of collaboration and true data, which is justified by a third party at the end. Let's add a few more terms to this. How long does something like this take? Before you say how long it takes to actually execute, how long does it take to set up, to actually put in place this process? And again, anybody can jump in here. Megan, you're nodding, so you're saying, yeah, it takes a while.
I'm thinking about the timeline we want
Yes.
in the future, as opposed to
How
what
much?
we've had.
So let's do this. Talk about the first thing that you consider to be a real pilot that you've been involved with, and how long it took you to set it up.
Well, for LearnLaunch, we've only been doing this work for 2 years.
Okay.
Leap is a little bit further along than us, but we started last school year, and we found out that we had the grant in August. So, and we needed to start implementing immediately. So we didn't have as much time, and we, to do the prep work that's necessary, really, really vital and necessary.
And talk about what that prep work
Yeah,
involves.
so-
Chris, you can jump in because, as we know, Leap has been doing this for
sure.
3 years as well.
Yeah. So there's so much that needs to happen before teachers are going to actually even select, let alone implement, a tool that they want to try. So one of the first most important steps is to really identify that team of teachers and make sure that they have a supportive principal and the environment that's kind of ripe for doing a project like that. And that can be as kind of nitty gritty as, do you have the infrastructure? Do you have the devices that are going to make this work? Do you have a team of teachers and a leader that's really going to support you in this? And then you get into sort of identifying an actual goal that you're trying to focus on. So we have a particular problem. We've been working with Boston Public Schools, and they asked us to focus on literacy, so ELA specifically, working on reading and writing goals. So then we have to work with a teacher team to really identify and get specific about a measurable goal, so that again, by the end of the process, we can actually look at data and say, has this worked? Has this been effective? Has it improved your instruction? Has it improved your students' growth? So that's all pre-work that needs to happen. And then we start to offer sort of a menu of options, because we really want the teachers to have ownership of what it is that they're trying, what it is that they're selecting. So we have to help them identify what products are out there that are going to match and be a good fit for this problem of practice or this goal that they have. And then they need to make the selection, and this is August. So we want them also to have, for the most part, if teachers are choosing more robust products, I find that it's helpful for them to have the year, because they're really going to, especially with something like a ThinkCERCA or a Lexia, you have to use it for a while before you're actually going to be able to start to examine data and see whether or not it's making a positive difference. And so it's important for them to have the experience of implementing, but we've been constrained in our first year in terms of trying to do all these things sort of together at the same time. And by the way, let's not overwhelm teachers who have other initiatives and are just starting the beginning of their year. So preferably, we'd like to operate on more of a timeline that's similar to what LEAP is doing, which maybe you can speak a little bit about. It gives you a little more prep time.
Yeah, and I mean, we've learned a lot at LEAP just through the reality of running these. I mean, you can speak to us in terms of year one, where it was like right before the summer, grab a tool and go, and then you sort of hit reality and you realize all the demands of the district or the charter or central office plus everything happening, and then the pilot gets deprioritized versus getting to a timeline that actually fits with like the budget and decision-making cycles of school, of curriculum decisions, and making that fit.
So when do you want to start a pilot?
So now we go a year and a half. So literally in January, prior to the upcoming school year, is when the pilot planning starts, and it really is like we realize we need a runway in terms of the mindset of what this is for, prioritization internally, getting the right decision makers at the table. I used to be a teacher, had stuff rain down from above and be like, Chris, take this, and I would intentionally just let it fail so I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. And
That's kind of an interesting strategy.
So you gotta be,
failure.
so to make sure this is of value to the teachers, to IT, to the principal, everyone involved. So it's not just an exercise for fun to like try a new tool, but this is really gonna help us improve our school. And when you get that, it's just been night and day in terms of the quality of implementations and to the studied part and learning of like how everyone's learning throughout the process. So January to June is all professional development and planning and working through that, the matching process. And emphasize on the toolkit thing we just launched, very much like LEAP and LearnLaunch in New York City and a whole bunch of other good partners. We just took all our tools and put them up there to share. So there's some really awesome stuff that's pretty informed by reality to just take and grab and use it for your own setting. And then we do the whole school year pilot, and I'd really emphasize the length is important. To their point earlier, when we first started, people were saying pilot, and they're like, oh, a month, a couple months? And I think that's like the honeymoon period. We really do use the dating analogy a lot in all of this work of something might be kind of attractive in the beginning. You get in your classroom and the kids kind of like it and it feels good. That doesn't mean you should not scale it to all 500 kids in the school. You also don't even know if it even works. And so we always see this evolution of the learning curve in the beginning of the year to, if they're still using ThinkCERCA on Lexia Core 5, like to fidelity come May, that means there's some good depth to that product. It means there's some good value to it. It's a very different conversation than what is in August, and so I think the length is very important. And that also shows to the teachers and those involved this is highly valued, and not just a, hey, we're going to make a decision on the fly and go.
So for folks who came in a little bit late, if you don't mind, AV folks, if you don't mind flashing that screen that we had before, Chris made reference to a site that just went live yesterday. This is from the Learning Assembly, and it does have a whole compilation of tools offered by, as Chris said, by LEAP, by LearnLaunch, Highlander, a number of other organizations, iZone. There are some cards that Beth right here has. If you haven't grabbed a card or you can't see the screen, come see her afterwards. But there are a collection of sort of ideas, thoughts, questions up on that site, so really great resource for that. Okay, so Eileen and Chris, now we've heard about their point of view a long time, a long launch. I know that you say that you want commitment and so forth, but actually tell us from the beginning, were you ready for this level of commitment? Were you ready for a process that was going to go for a year and a half?
I guess we were, in the sense that we had already implemented, ThinkCERCA. I mean, we actually launched with 30 customers, so we didn't have the benefit of lead time, and we didn't even have the benefit of a fully developed product that has everything it has today. And our challenge was, really as an entrepreneur, it's the challenge of staying alive. It is truly like life or death. The product works.
That's tough, right?
And
these guys are saying, you need a year and a half to get it to be in there, and you're a startup. How do you stay alive during a period like that?
Yeah, I think there's actually a couple of dimensions of what they both talked about, that from an entrepreneur's perspective, and if I can, just also as a former teacher and administrator's perspective, that I think is really important. First of all, both of them mentioned the challenge of, even with all of the support of major philanthropies, school principals, interested teachers, et cetera, they still have a challenge of fitting into district initiatives. And that's one of the problems that I think we have yet to solve as a whole community. If we want to see systems level change on a rapid and large kind of scale, we need to have these be facilitated at a district level. And small to a district is not the same as small to a school. And I think that it's really...
Define what you mean by that.
I mean that in order for the organizations that we're talking about here to be most effective, which I think their role in the ecosystem is to provide the articulations, as they have here, of how best practice works in terms of implementing technology in a world where technology has not lived before, and to then study the tools. Obviously the barrier to entry for creating tools is much lower than it was 30 years ago. So it's just as easy to scale maybe a good idea and a bad idea, or something that works and something that doesn't. And so I think the role of efficacy and evaluating what actually works is a really critical role that somebody needs to play, because we don't have an established marketplace or an FDA or a whatever. People are making decisions with less information than perhaps we'd all like, given the critical nature of the work we're doing. So that's one, is I think that pilot and length of time can actually be in some ways shortened with better support from a district level perspective in terms of focus. And so things can take a shorter time, and frankly, they need to. Half of the kids in half of our states are growing up in poverty, and their life trajectories are changing way faster than we are. And so we need to figure out how to do it faster.
So let's come back to that point. Chris, as Lexia, you represent a company that's been at this for a really long time. You were doing, this kind of work before Leap and LearnLaunch and even EdSurge existed. How has your perspective, how has Lexia's perspective on what it means to take your product into a school or into a district changed because of these kinds of pilots, because of these long-term evaluations?
Sure. Well, and as all of my fellow panelists have mentioned, this is a unique, a distinctive collaboration. And because it is really grounded in research, I think we were very much prepared for these particular pilots to be long-term because we know from our experience, I believe we have now 8 published studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals and using experimental and controlled treatment and so forth. And the treatment period is typically a school year for such formal research.
And
so
just to be
based on
clear,
that
when you say
experience,
8 published studies, that predated these pilots, or is that including these pilots?
they're all on our website. They're not from these pilots.
Got it.
Those were
Okay,
done.
so this is work that you did before.
Before
this
and during,
existed.
yep,
Yep.
and it's an ongoing factor. So we know that kind of research, often it's not uncommon for the treatment period to be as much as a full school year.
I think it's also important to make the distinction that with Lexia and with ThinkCERCA, we're talking about literacy. And so if you're trying to study the efficacy of a product that literally the goal is to teach you 2 + 2 = 4, versus like how to do critical reading or reading comprehension for the first time, there is just a developmental period and a measurability. It's easier to measure progress for a kindergartner than a high school student in terms of reading growth. In a short period of time, it's you can't see growth in reading assessments that currently exist in a very short period of time once you get past a certain age. So I think literacy has its own specific nature, and that is one of the reasons for the length of the pilot.
Okay, that's a great point.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's context dependent.
Yeah.
Could I ask Chris a
Yeah,
question?
go for it.
Because it seems like the preparation period has, now you've been at this for several years, it's been lengthened. You're giving yourself more time.
Yeah.
And so what are the types of things that you have discovered need to be added and emphasized during that readiness period before the tools are introduced?
Great question. The analogy we kind of use is like, not to be drastic, but almost like a heart transplant. So if the body isn't ready for it, it can just reject it. Even if you might have the most perfect tool or technology that you've made, the setting and the context is huge, and realizing we need some good runway to it. So, top of my head, number one is like paradigm or mental shift. We learn really quickly. If you go concrete, people just want the tool and go when they miss the why. So a lot of the early stuff in it is with the school team on the why, and for us it's personalized learning, so how is this going to help us better personalize for our students? 2 is change management. Schools are just not engines of innovation naturally or used to this type of stuff, and so how do you help leadership and middle tier leadership and department heads manage a team through this level of shift? Because to your point, with both of your products, they're a pretty big pedagogy shift around how the classroom's going to function, what that looks like. If you've never done it as a teacher, being able to manage through that. 3 would be cleaning house. I think one thing we found is there's not a lack of technology in schools, it's almost like an oversaturation. And so rather than this being another add-on, and in the old days, with books, like you'd clean out the closet, or when it was like CD-ROMs when I was teaching, you'd clean out your CD-ROMs. But everything is cloud-based, so you don't even realize how much you're piling up until the tool seems to sit down, and you're like, oh, you got 20 different logins and all this, and we don't even know why we're using this. And so like cleaning house is big to help make that tool come in the prioritization. There's basic IT and ops around it. And it's just that decision-making process. But I think that was a lot of our learnings from year 1 where we were much quicker. And to your point, it's now a full 6-month runway to take off to get it there. But for us, it's just been night and day on the quality. Implementations are so much better with that runway, and it also reduces the pressure on the staff and also on the company. We haven't spoken much to it, but from the beginning, we want to make sure that this was sustainable for the company partners, because they are equally putting a lot of time and energy into the game. So how do we really make it beneficial for them, for their staff, the feedback to the product and what that looks like, to to make it fit.
So let's talk about the company side for a minute. And Chris, I think you used the word commitment. Clearly, LEAP is committed, and LearnLaunch is committed. But the whole idea behind the pilot is also to figure out if things don't work and figure out if things fail. So talk a little bit about, when you think about commitment, what kind of commitment are you looking for from the school, from the organizations, and how do you think about the risk? Because there's a risk that at the end of this, they're going to say, yeah, you know, you guys, you're not really the one we want. How do you think about that?
I think for us, the commitment, having the facilitated commitment, because, normally throughout our partnership process, we actually tell administrators not to use the word pilot at all, because what it suggests is we're not really sure if we're going to do this. We're not sure if we really like the product. See if you guys like it, and go kind of figure it out by yourself. So the runway that Chris was talking about is about creating really a frame around the use of the product that says, we actually do believe this is a promising product, it's been vetted, we think it's going to work, it's been proven elsewhere, therefore you should take this very seriously and make room for it in your, I think the 20 logins is a great example, because early on, as we were in our first year, people would be like, well, how are we supposed to fit this in with X,
But I have to say, you guys won, right? These two companies in the LearnLaunch, in the LEAP trials, you two were the only two companies that LEAP was willing to come out and say, yep, we think these guys succeeded. What about the other companies? I mean, what about, how if they are also saying to the teachers, hey, this isn't a pilot, we're really committed, and that sort of thing, and then at the end you say, it wasn't quite what we expected. Is there disappointment? Is there confusion? Is there, Chris, you're nodding, so you had to have these conversations with teachers.
Here in Boston as well.
Yeah.
Because from the beginning, I mean, it was a tricky setup, and honestly, big leaps of faith on both of them to even participate, where we were clear, like, we're not here to beat up companies. Like, we acknowledge the field is evolving, everyone's learning, and also, like, it just might be the right fit for that tool. So for those companies that sort of didn't make the publication, we did not put their names out there intentionally. And we don't share what companies are piloting with us, because it needs to be a safe place for teachers and schools to try something, a safe place for the companies to try new things. I mean, we see it as very much, I'll go back to what Chris mentioned, a collaboration, and everyone's learning as we move through it to get to that point. So that's kind of how it's framed.
But then what happens to those companies, and what did the teachers say when you said, that heart transplant didn't work, the patient's dead?
It's honest conversations, and I see it, I think you mentioned it's like people are taking a lot of decisions really rapidly without information. And so I'd honestly say it's more of a thankfulness of we're actually making informed decisions instead of just going off of our gut. Or just going off like, hey, we got that thing working and therefore we're going to use it. And so being able to help the teaching staff next year just actually see this arc of a coherent decision across the team is pretty powerful. Because usually it's I went to a conference, saw this awesome thing, bring it in, try it, go, and it's just, the speed of school is just so fast. And so I think they appreciated that part to it, and where we sat as a third party to actually help facilitate that with administration and leadership helped as well.
I think that part I'm going to keep coming back to, the systems level decision and the organization decision, because, I mean, let's face it, federal mandates fail. Like a pilot going under, by a single teacher in an organization is kind of doomed from the start in many situations, not all, but in many. So when you think about when like whole states, whole countries, whole school systems, kind of focus on an initiative, it's what you're accountable for, whatever, and it still doesn't work, that's the nature of the context of these tools being used by teachers. And so the systems level coherent decision and we're going to like clear out this stuff and we're going to make room for this and this is what it should look like, that is kind of an essential piece to it. But I think from a company's perspective, at the end of our first year, we noticed that the only students that didn't grow were the students who were in fourth grade who were English language learners. And that, even though we had this other shining data, we had this like, oh, we didn't serve those students. And so we added a third grade and we added ELL supports for everything. So I think that the benefit of the study and the safety that is provided is they give us feedback for what we're not doing well, because I think nobody would go into this industry for any other reason than to make the world a better place and make a product that actually works, I think.
And for us,
That's a great example.
I was just going to say, for us, it's reinforced the importance of that readiness, because in our first year, we did have a product that did not succeed in one of our schools. And the main reason really was they didn't have the infrastructure to support it. It was a very media-rich product. And if we had taken more time in the beginning to really determine that ahead of time or caught it earlier, it might have been able to be successful. And instead, we were able to sort of share the feedback with the product and set the teachers up with something that was a better fit for them. But the learning behind it was important for that product and for the teachers. Now they've sort of upped their broadband in their school and their network capabilities, and that product has that awareness, and we do too, so that we can provide a better information around matching, which is another one of those elements that takes so much time in terms of preparing for what we hope will be a successful pilot.
Eileen, I loved your example of what ThinkCERCA learned from that pilot. Okay, ELA students in the 4th grade are really challenged. Chris, have you found through the pilots that you've done with LEAP and LearnLaunch, have you kind of reached some insights about about Lexia's work, about what you offer, about how to make it better? Anything you can share?
Well, I think the comment was made earlier about, Chris, about someone just using something for a month versus 6 months versus a school year, and how the nature of the implementation, the nature of the concerns, the needs of the educators evolves over the course of, say, an entire school year. So when you do have that opportunity to take a deep dive, we get the deep dive with the school. We really collaborate. We get to really know their needs. The school really gets a deep dive, not just a superficial initial exposure to a tool. They get to also take a journey towards focusing on factors such as the school readiness and school culture and preparation for a truly data-driven, personalized learning environment. So I think that a lot of the learnings that we gain come from having that longer-term relationship where you can really have more in-depth conversations.
So I'm going to push back one more time. Can you give us one example of something that Lexia changed or really thinks differently about now than you did before you engaged in this class of study pilots?
Let's see, because as a web-based application, of course, you're continuously improving. It's not a static product. We're very committed, I'd say, to a process of continuous improvement. So I would say that the ongoing feedback, we make sure that that there's that ongoing feedback that is coming back, not just to the people that are there in Chicago working with those schools, but back to the folks in the home office that are also involved with the design and development.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about timing, because once again, these are big commitments, and yet there are many, many tools. There are many startup tools. What would it take to do something that's shorter? And I think Eileen started to point us in a couple of really interesting directions, which is it may be context dependent. It may be a little dependent on whether you can show some evidence of learning by using a particular tool, and maybe if it's got a narrower scope than literacy in general, maybe that helps. What else would help make these tighter, shorter, a little bit more, a little easier to live with, perhaps?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, all of you should answer.
Okay, so when 5 years ago, I was in Chicago Public Schools. I was director of curriculum instruction for 115 schools, and one of the things that I think I learned after very immediately learned after transitioning out of that position into the entrepreneurial world was what fast means, what rapid means in the startup world.
So what does it mean?
Well, to give you an example of an advisor of ours who literally kind of invented the driverless car, covered the earth with internet through Google Loons and the Google Glass, he talks about how it took 4 people $5 million in 4 months to develop the Google Loons. I think that one of the problems we have in just in the industry is really the metaphors we use to describe innovation in schools. I think that we need to think about again, I kind of refer to the metaphor of journey, and you use that metaphor, and I don't mean to criticize your use of the metaphor. I understand what you were saying, but I do think that it's a dangerous one for us because it suggests such a long period of time. And when you think about how you can close the achievement gap in 3 years with catch-up growth, it seems wrong for us not to do that.
So what metaphor do you like?
I think rapid prototyping in the sense that entrepreneurs use it, where you do 20 iterations in 1 day, not 20 over the course of 20 years. So I want to, I guess, reframe the conversation around, one of the things you do in product development is you actually measure every single aspect. So if it is, the problem with the implementation was the way the desks were arranged, that takes 5 minutes to solve. It doesn't take a year to study it and reflect on it. And I think basically what we as entrepreneurs who, especially those who've been educators before, can share back with the world of educators, and what I think a lot of educators who've just gone ahead and done it. Like I know there's a lot of Chicago people in the room, and I just can't tell you how much actual personalized learning is happening. It's not a future tense, it's already happening, that they just did it, and where the tools actually drove the innovation. So there is kind of a benefit to thinking about the tool as a driver of the innovation, as opposed to just trying to create the space in which the tool will eventually be. I think of that, and I often joke, it's like selling somebody a set of pipes, and then eventually we're going to put in the water, when really what the person wants is the water.
Yeah.
So there is just a balance between setting up the infrastructure and letting the tool also drive that infrastructure that can happen if we start to reframe the way we're thinking about how quickly we're willing to make some changes.
So I was with you, and then you lost me. Okay. So we started down the path of saying, from an entrepreneurial point of view, rapid prototyping really matters. Making 20 changes in the course of a day really matters. This is in the context of what Chris and Megan have described, which is, hey, we need to set up a framework, so there's going to be success, and we need to know this is going to work. So are you now saying, hey, because the tools are rapidly changing, it's okay for someone to try it out. It's okay to kind of use the innovation to push us. Mm-hmm. And how does that fit then in the context of pilots? Do we just recognize that, hey, some things we're going to try and other things we're going to pilot? I mean, help me understand that.
Yeah, no, I think it's more like at sort of, again, going back to the organization level and the system level, I think that some of the changes required to set up the infrastructure are changes that can be made in 5 minutes. And I used the desk example. That does not take a year to figure out and should not be what we're talking about at the end of the year. Well, the teacher who used 3 centers had a better outcome than the person who still stood in front of the class and had, so I guess what I'm talking about is just, if we can share back some of the lessons of entrepreneurship, some pieces of it take time. Other pieces do not take time. And I think it's really segmenting out what we mean by the context for success and the conditions for success, because I think there are really 5 levers, which is the people, the places, the products, the processes, and time, and that's it. Taking those 5 resources and really figuring out if we're optimizing them and really reflecting and measuring on those specific levers and assets that we already have in our buildings, like that's kind of making it simpler to separate those aspects of the context and measure and solve the problem in real time.
So Megan and Chris, can you imagine an environment in which maybe we're speeding up, even studied pilots? Don't both jump in at once here.
The first thing that came up, and again, I think this goes back to the collaboration, and you do have different parties coming from different sides. You mentioned it as the driver. I think from our lens, we see it as the catalyst.
And sorry, refine it?
The
tool?
product.
Okay.
So I think we've definitely seen in terms of like pilots in Chicago and move to personalized learning, the product can come in and create like a really strong catalyst to drive certain changes in behaviors and et cetera. And especially these two products, they have a pretty set vision on how that thing can be implemented. And that kind of drives new conversations and discussions that you won't have without it. And then for the length of time to it, it's one tension that we find, the way we deal with it at LEAP, is you have the year-long study, you have the control groups, you have the empirical side to it. But our schools also have what we call innovation cycles. So it's an action research, and that's taking a bit more inspiration from the rapid prototyping part of things, so that for us it's every 8 weeks the schools are iterating on the pilot and what that looks like, while the tool is staying constant and where they move through it. And I think we've definitely seen, after schools do that for a year and they kind of learn that muscle or that way of living, the next year they're faster and they get better at it. And some of our early schools, they just do this, it's like their way of life. It's kind of cool to see on where it's at. But there's a learning curve the first time they go through it. And the last thing I said for the tightness part, like we do year long because, as I mentioned with literacy, like you need sort of a long treatment to see it. You're not going to change your reading level in a month. But there are smaller forms of studies or pilots or whatever you want to call them that can fit. With that toolkit, it includes a evaluation taxonomy because we had a lot of those debates among the learning assembly because we all do these different types of pilots and some of them do very short trials. So to try and see along the continuum where it goes back to what question are you trying to answer, and that'll help dictate if you need a year, if you need a week, or if you need a day, or if you need a multi-year. So also trying to make sure pilots aren't like set in one fixed mindset, but it goes back to what's the question or goal you're trying to answer, and that'll dictate your research design.
Great. I want to make sure that if there are people who have questions in the audience, that this is a great moment to jump up and down, raise your hand, and join the conversation. Yes, sir. Come right up here. Wait, 1 sec. Stand up, and a mic will approach you.
Hi. So you all mentioned for a new product getting into a pilot with a school district, it was very important to not be tentative about it, right? To go in and say that you believe in this product, it's vetted. But so for a new product, though, what do you define, or what have you found to be sufficient saying, oh, well, this is vetted, we think this is going to work? Does that mean internal pilots where you've brought some kids in and seen this work? Does that mean you've got teachers that think this is a good idea that's backing it? Can you just be a little more specific of what defines that we think it's going to work for a new product?
Great question. So how do you get into a
We
pilot?
have a better vetting process than we do at this point.
So for our context, the pilots should be products that are ready to scale the next year. So we look, one, on like company sustainability. So if it's a like let's say for a successful pilot, and we now have 50 schools next year that want to do it, is that company going to have capacity to scale and move through it? Two, is there a basis around research incorporated into the design? I mean, honestly, we have like a 10-page application the companies do, and it's like night and day of either you see the salesperson fill this thing out and it's got all this like lingo and there's nothing to it, or you can tell they really are being methodical about the design of their product, and that's part of what we're trying to do on the smarter demand, smarter supply side to it. If there are any studies, that's huge. So the fact that like Lexia came in and they already had a history of evidence, that's really strong. And then there's a lot of just fit, like for us, we do a call out of like we're doing K-8 literacy or K-8 math, so for personalized learning. So we're also looking for the fit of where the schools are kind of headed. And then we have sort of a creation panel that goes through the vetting and kind of moves through it so we can kind of stay as a neutral third party. And then we didn't talk much about it, but then we then put all these things in front of schools. So at the end of the day, it's like the school is going to have to choose you. So it's been fascinating of like big name products coming in and other products coming in, and we don't really care how big or small you are. If you got something good, we're going to get you in front of schools, and if they pick you, that's a good signal for us. Same thing in the reality of the marketplace. They're choosing this product over this one. They see value to it, and then moving to the pilot.
So just to give us a sense of scale, Chris, in the last round of evaluation of choosing the tools that would go into a pilot, tell us how many tools sort of put their hand up to be evaluated, and then how many wound up in pilots?
Don't quote me on the exact numbers. Ballpark, I think in the last round we had about 80 companies apply in. I think about 20 made it to the creation panel, and then about 10 got in front of schools at what we call match day, where they're private conversations with the schools to make that pick.
Great.
So it's rigorous. It's rigorous. And even at like Silicon Valley Education Fund isn't here, they do like much leaner pilots. And so if we have a really young company come in, we'll say, we're not a good fit for you, but talk to our friends over in Silicon Valley Education Fund.
Great. Another question?
Sorry, the only thing I would add is just, I had Chris go first because LEAP has been at this longer and they do it for ELA and math, and we've been focused primarily with Boston Public Schools and ELA products, so it's been a smaller cluster of products that we've been looking at. But one thing I will mention is that we've come up with, and you can find some of this in the toolkit, some criteria that we find that teachers are looking for, that they need answers for quickly, that will help them kind of make a better informed choice about whether or not this product would be a good fit for them. So that's part of our application process too, and part of sort of our learning from doing this work is that there are some answers that aren't necessarily on a product's website that a teacher might need that will ask and are kind of working on collecting so that we have that info.
Great.
Yeah.
Chris may have just answered my question, but for a young, hungry curriculum company that doesn't have a full year worth of content, but has maybe 16, 20 weeks that is, we think is pretty impactful. Other ideas, SVEF for sure, like iHub, right, is part of that program. Any other ideas to get out and get into real schools with real kids? And I mean, of course, there's the like local networking, friend, those kind, and I'm doing that already. But that third party, the value of someone else that's helped conducting the research. Other ideas of before we get to the point of a full year to come to you, other places to look.
Yeah, in terms of formal pilots, so New York City is also part of the Learning Assembly. They have shorter run trials. Even all of the 7 organizations collaborate, it's Digital Promise, LearnLaunch, Citizen Schools, etc. Each year we kind of then put out like what our focus will be. We also anticipate, I mean, part of the whole idea of the Learning Assembly is like to make piloting and this sort of advocacy and more intentionality become the norm.
Yeah.
Even though like Alex is here from Mathematica and the USDOE, they have the RCE coach thing that they released. So it's awesome to see where the field is moving of just like, let's be smarter about how we look at tools. And so I think there's formal organizations for that, and for these lighter ones, starting to see more districts, Skip Foundation, others pick this up. And so other entry points for a young product to kind of come in. Anecdotally, we usually see like someone's a champion for it to kind of get it in front of.
And someone is a educator, or like when you say someone, that's your best friend, or like who's someone?
As you say, it's a networking side to it. I mean, we try and talk all the time, like even for LEAP, we had 80 applications come in, we then share it with everyone else, so like, hey, in case this helps you out. So sort of behind the curtain, there is a lot of talk around what's happening in the industry.
Sure.
So wherever you get some good proof points, share it out and get it out there. But I think at the end of the day, I think people are looking for higher quality design of the products, and so that'll help you raise above, because there's like so much just bad apps out there.
I know.
And you're like, I don't need to like work.
I taught for 20 years, so I know very well what's out there.
And where that fits into.
Great. Thank you.
Anything else you'd add in terms of?
Sadly, this panel could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we are running a little bit short on time. A couple of ideas that I think that I certainly heard and that I hope we all take away. Words to associate with the word pilot include studied pilot, a pilot, thinking about using the term pilot in a very, very intentional way. It's a bigger process. It is something that involves data. It involves collaboration on the part of the company, maybe an organization like LearnLaunch or LEAP, maybe, and then certainly the schools and the companies, that there's a reality to this, that we are trying to actually find real results, and that there is a process and a replicatable process. Again, quick shout out to the Learning Assembly and to the collection of tools that they've put up on the website and those cards that Beth has at the back if you don't have one yet. To remember that there are goals and so forth. And then also to remember that this kind of studied pilot, which is a big process, is not the only way of beginning to sort of check for efficacy, usefulness of tools. Anything else anyone wants to add to that?
No, I would just reiterate that the more we can connect systems level leaders with this level of commitment to, making a space for this and measuring results, the more we can trust, once there's proof points, that a pilot is not 30 kids, a pilot can be 3,000 kids at a grade band versus a classroom. And the sooner we get there, the sooner we will, I think, create a healthier marketplace for better tools. And as long as we're all held accountable for the best outcomes for students, we're going to have better, cheaper products for everybody.
Great. Please read EdSurge if you want to hear more about what all of these folks are doing. We're trying to report and cover and share the resources and ideas all the time. And join me in thanking this panel.